He showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning, my son-in-law, holding a folder of papers and wearing the kind of smile that people put on when they've already decided how the conversation is going to end. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him, looked at that folder and said, "You've got some nerve coming here alone." He didn't flinch. That should have told me everything. Let me back up. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a regional logistics company from a single truck and a borrowed warehouse in Chattanooga. My wife, God rest her, she was the one who talked me into it. She said, "Hank, you've been working for other people your whole life. It's time." She was right. She was always right. We grew it together. She handled the books and I handled everything else, and by the time she passed 6 years ago, we had 11 facilities across 4 states and a name that people in the industry recognized. I gave my daughter the world. That's not bragging. That's just the truth. Private school, college, her first car, her first apartment. I didn't do it to be thanked. I did it because she was my daughter, and because her mother would have wanted it that way, and because I could. When she came home from Atlanta at 27 and told me she'd met someone, I was glad. She seemed happy. He seemed decent. He wore a good watch, and he had a firm handshake. And he talked about his work in commercial real estate with the kind of confidence that used to impress me. Used to. The wedding was beautiful. October, up in the mountains outside Asheville. My daughter looked exactly like her mother had looked in 1987. That same brightness, that same white of tilting her head when she laughed. I paid for the whole thing, the venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographer, the open bar, the honeymoon in Portugal. His family contributed 1 case of wine from some cousin's vineyard in California, and a toast that went on for 11 minutes. I didn't say a word about that. Not then, not after. What I didn't know, what I found out slowly, the way you find out about a leak in the roof. First one small stain and then another, and then suddenly a whole section of ceiling, was that my son-in-law had a very specific idea about what having a wealthy father-in-law meant. It meant unlimited access. The first ask came 8 months after the wedding. He wanted seed money for a new venture, a boutique co-working space in Midtown Atlanta. He had a deck, a projected return, a timeline. I listened carefully. I asked questions. He had answers for about half of them. I gave him $120,000 because my daughter looked at me across the kitchen table with those eyes, and because I told myself that this is what you do. You help family. You give people a chance. He burned through it in 11 months. The co-working space never opened. The second ask came 14 months after that. Different venture. Same deck, same projected return, different numbers. This time he wanted $200,000, and this time he brought a lawyer to the meeting, which my own attorney later told me was either very professional or a very specific kind of threat, depending on how you read it. I didn't give him the $200,000. I gave him $75,000, structured as a loan, with a repayment schedule that his lawyer looked at like I'd handed him a document in a foreign language. He never made a single payment. And through all of this, through every ask and every shortfall and every holiday dinner where he talked about his next big idea, my daughter said nothing, or almost nothing. Once, when I tried to bring it up privately, she said, "Dad, he's working on it. You just have to trust him." And there was something in her voice that I recognized from when she was 16, and defending choices I already knew were mistakes. That voice that meant the conversation was already over before it started. I tried. I want to be clear about that. I tried to build a relationship with him. I invited him to Braves games. I brought him into conversations about the business, not offers, just conversations, treating him like family. He was polite in a way that was somehow worse than rude. He listened to everything I said with this particular attentiveness that I eventually understood was not interest. It was assessment. He was always calculating. My 63rd birthday was my daughter's idea. She called me in August and said she wanted to do something special. A dinner at the house, some family, some close friends, a proper celebration. I said sure. I said I'd love that. She said she'd handle everything, and I believed her because she's organized and capable, and because I wanted to believe her. There were about 40 people there on that Saturday evening. My brother and his wife drove up from Birmingham. Two couples I've been friends with since before my daughter was born. A few people from the company. My daughter had rented tables and chairs, and she'd done something with the backyard that her mother would have loved. Strings of lights and big planters full of flowers. And for about the first hour and a half, I felt something close to genuinely happy. Then my son-in-law asked me to come inside. He said he had a birthday present for me. He said it in front of several people, and he smiled when he said it, and I followed him into my own study, my own house, the house I have lived in for 22 years, and he closed the door behind us. He opened his briefcase on my desk. He pulled out a document and laid it flat. It was a transfer of ownership form for 40% of my company. He didn't ease into it. He said, "I've had this looked at by 3 different attorneys. It's clean. It's fair. You transfer 40% now. The rest goes to a trust that names your daughter and any future grandchildren as beneficiaries. And you stay on as chairman for as long as you want. You'd still be in the building every day. Nothing changes for you." I stood there for a moment. I said, "You brought this to my birthday party." He said, "There's never a perfect time for these conversations." I said, "You brought this to my birthday party and you expect me to sign it tonight." He said, "I think it's the right move for the family, for the business, for your legacy." I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, but I'm not sure I have the right words. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was more like a door closing. Like something that had been uncertain for a long time, suddenly becoming certain. Like a diagnosis you'd half expected but still weren't ready for. I said, "Where's my daughter right now?" He said, "She's outside. She knows about this." That was the sentence. Right there. She knows about this. I picked up the document. I looked at it for a few seconds. Then I set it back down on the desk and I walked out of the study and back out to the party. And I found my brother standing near the bar with a glass of bourbon, and I said, "I need you to stay close tonight." He looked at my face and he said, "What happened?" I said, "I'll tell you in a minute." My son-in-law came out of the study about 3 minutes later. He'd put the document back in his briefcase, but he was carrying the briefcase in one hand at his side, and he came and stood next to my daughter and said something quietly to her, and she looked across the yard at me with an expression I will never forget. It was not guilt. It was closer to frustration. Like I was the problem. Like I had already done something wrong by not signing. She came over to me. She said, "Dad, can we talk?" I said, "Not here." She said, "He just wants to secure our future. You talk all the time about wanting to protect us. This is how." I said, "He wants 40% of my company at my birthday party." She said, her voice dropping, "You always do this. You always make things harder than they need to be." I had said almost nothing. I'd walked out of her room. I had gone to stand with my brother. I always make things harder than they need to be. I looked at her for a moment and then I said, "I love you. We are not talking about this tonight. Please go enjoy your party." And I walked to the other end of the yard and stood with my old friends from the company, and I talked about the Braves and about a fishing trip somebody was planning for the spring, and I kept my face very still and I did not make a scene. But I was already thinking. I want to be honest about something. The worst part of that night was not my son-in-law. I had him figured out a long time ago. The worst part was my daughter's face. That flash of frustration. The way she said, "You always do this," because that told me the story she had been telling herself. The one where I was the obstacle, the difficult one, the man who withheld things he should have given freely. He had built that story with her, carefully, over years, and she believed it. And I thought, how long has she believed it? The guests started leaving around 10. My brother was the last to go. He stood with me on the front porch, and I told him everything, and he listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about my brother. And when I was done, he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to make some calls on Monday." He said, "Good." Sunday was quiet. My daughter and her husband left after breakfast. She hugged me at the door, and I hugged her back, and neither of us said anything about the night before. He shook my hand. I let him. Monday morning, I called my attorney. I told him about the document, described what I remembered of the structure. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Did you sign anything?" I said no. He said, "Good. Keep it that way. Come in Wednesday." I also called the head of my accounting firm. I told her I wanted a full internal audit. Every account, every account, every expenditure, anything that had my son-in-law's name on it, or any account he had access to. She said she'd start immediately. What she found took about 3 weeks to fully document. Over the course of 4 years, my son-in-law had, through my daughter, gained access to 3 accounts I had set up for family use: a household expense account, a travel account, and an account I had created specifically for my daughter's personal use with no strings attached because she was my daughter and I trusted her. He'd been drawing from all 3, not always in large amounts, not in a way that would trigger anything, but consistently, methodically, over dozens of transactions. The total came to just over $214,000 on top of the $120,000 from the first investment and the $75,000 from the second. More than $400,000. My attorney reviewed everything and told me I had several options. He laid them out clearly and without editorializing, which is why I have worked with him for 15 years. I made my decisions calmly. I am not going to describe every step of what happened next because some of it is still in process. What I will tell you is this. I restructured the company. I worked with my board and my attorney to establish a trust structure that protects the business and its employees, all 340 of them, regardless of what happens with my estate. My son-in-law's name does not appear anywhere in it. I closed the 3 family accounts. I opened new ones. I had a forensic accountant prepare a complete report with documentation of every transaction. I gave a copy to my attorney. I gave a copy to my daughter. That conversation was the hardest thing I have done in 6 years. We sat in my living room, just the 2 of us, and I walked her through the report page by page. She said very little. At one point she said, "I didn't know about all of this." I believe her. I believe she didn't know about all of it. I think she knew about some of it. I think she chose for a long time not to look too carefully. I told her that I loved her without conditions. I told her that would never change. I told her that I was not angry at her, that I understood how these things happen, how a person can be moved slowly and gradually into a position they never would have chosen if they'd seen the whole map at once. I told her that he was not welcome in my home. She left without saying much. She called me 4 days later. She said she needed time. I said I understood. I said I would be here. My son-in-law has not contacted me directly since the birthday party. My attorney has been in contact with his attorney. That process is ongoing. I go to the office most mornings. I have coffee with my assistant, who has worked with me for 12 years and who said when I told her some version of this story, I never trusted that smile. I walk the floor. I know most of my employees by name. I know which ones have kids in college and which ones are dealing with sick parents and which ones have been there since the Chattanooga days when we were all figuring it out together. I think about my wife a lot. She had a gift for seeing through people that I never quite developed. She would have seen through him at the wedding rehearsal dinner, I think. Probably before that, she would have found a way to tell me and I would have listened because I always listened to her. And maybe things would have gone differently. But maybe not. Maybe some things you have to live through in order to understand. There's a photograph on my desk at the office. My daughter at 8 years old at a company picnic, sitting on top of one of the original trucks with her legs dangling over the side and her head thrown back laughing. I look at it every day. That's who she is to me. That's the person I'm waiting for her to find her way back to. The folder is still in my attorney's office. Signed, sealed, everything in order. The company, the trust, the restructuring, all of it done cleanly and without drama, without a scene at a party, without a raised voice. My son-in-law walked into my study on my 63rd birthday with a briefcase and a plan. I walked out of that room with a clearer picture of my life than I'd had in years. I think that's the birthday present I actually needed. The photograph on my desk hasn't moved in 6 years. My daughter at 8 years old, sitting on top of one of the original trucks, head thrown back laughing. I look at it every morning, before the emails start, before the calls come in, before the day takes over, and I think about how much of what happened could have been avoided, not by being harder, not by being colder, but by paying closer attention earlier. Here's what I've come to understand. The people who take from you rarely announce themselves. They don't come in through a broken window. They come in through the front door, shaking your hand, wearing a good watch, saying the right things at the right moments. And the reason they can do that, the reason it works, is that somewhere along the way, you started valuing the appearance of peace more than the reality of truth. I did that. I kept writing checks when I should have been asking harder questions. Not because I was naive, but because I wanted to believe the story I was telling myself about family and generosity and giving people a chance. What that birthday party forced me to do, what my son-in-law actually gave me without meaning to, was clarity. He sat across my own desk in my own study and showed me exactly who he was. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. You can't keep choosing comfortable confusion over uncomfortable honesty. The 3 things I've come back to, turning this over in my mind these past months, are character, judgment, and the willingness to act on what you know. Character is the thing that holds when no one is watching, when the money is there, and the opportunity is there, and the only thing standing between you and taking it is your own sense of what's right. My son-in-law had spent 4 years telling me, not in words but in every transaction, every shortfall, every smile, exactly what his character was. I chose not to read it clearly enough for too long. Judgment is harder, because it requires you to look at people you love and see them honestly, not as you wish they were. When my daughter said, "You always make things harder than they need to be," she wasn't talking about the documents. She was telling me what 4 years of slow, careful repositioning had built inside her. That hurt more than anything else that night. But it also told me exactly what I was working with. You can only make good decisions from an accurate picture. And then there's the third thing, the willingness to actually move. Not out of anger, not to punish, but because the moment you understand the truth of a situation and do nothing, you've made a choice just as much as if you'd signed those papers. I called my attorney on Monday morning. I asked for the audit. I sat with my daughter and walked through every page. These were not dramatic gestures. They were quiet, deliberate, one after another. The company is protected. The people who worked with me for 20, 30 years, they're protected. That's what mattered. That's what my wife and I built together, and it will outlast this. My daughter called last week. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing important. A restaurant she'd tried, a book she was reading, something that happened at her gym. We didn't mention him. We didn't mention the audit. But she called, and I answered. And I think that's where it starts.